Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. Today, we're so fortunate to be joined by the fantastic Nathan Kress to talk all about the iCarly reboot. And the first thing I was really interested in is you've talked in the past about how by the time you finished working on the show originally, that you felt like there was a real assimilation between you and the character of Freddy, and that, your sense of self and character really kind of melded into what that character was by the end. And obviously, you're picking this up several years later, which is a really unique and interesting challenge as an actor. And particularly because you brought so much of yourself into the character in the beginning, how did you reapproach building this character and developing him from the space in between with that idea of how much of your central self was in him to begin with? And did you want that same degree of assimilation into him?
Yeah, I really think that was kind of the key to the whole thing, and the only anchor that I sort of had to the character. Fortunately, and I guess luckily for me, the way that they decided to write Freddy in this show, minus the two divorces, that didn't happen in my life, but finding him as being a young father, sort of figuring things out for the first time and muddling through that and everything, and being kind of still the adult in the room. um, I, I I can't tell if I should feel personally attacked or validated by the fact that they made me almost the same person that I am in real life, but it did give me a little bit of a bridge to be able to kind of assimilate myself again into that character. That was one of the biggest questions that I asked myself was, okay, a lot of stuff has changed, a lot of stuff has happened, and I can see even just from the pilot that the way that Freddy's reacting to stuff is a little bit different. In the first iteration of the show, he'd fly off the handle a lot more. He was a little bit more amped up, especially in the first and second season, and that was, that was a questionable choice on my part. In hindsight, when I watched those episodes, I go, "Oh god, why did I do that? Why would I have made that choice to just go nuclear on almost every line?" I regret that deeply. But fortunately, toward the end of the show, Freddie calmed down a little bit, but he was still maybe a little bit neurotic, a little bit more sensitive to the things that other people would say to him. And it's cool because all of these really bad things happened to Freddie, but in a way, they kind of improved his outlook and his attitude. He's become a little bit more of a positive, water off the duck's back mentality, and somehow even more of a hopeless romantic than he was before, regardless of the things that have all happened to him. So it's been kind of fun to see his evolution change in a way. But even with that, there was sort of a roadmap with kind of his reaction to stimuli in the pilot. But I still had the general question of just how does he talk? What does he do? He's an adult now. He's not a teenager anymore. And for the first 4 episodes, it was a lot of me still going back to Video Village and saying, is this right? Like, does this look right? I don't know. I can't tell because, it's a little easier on single camera. You can watch playback and you can sort of see what you're doing. And sometimes as an actor, and you learn this a lot when you're doing self-tape auditions now in the middle of a pandemic, you can try and do something on camera and in your mind, you're totally doing it. But then when you watch it back, you go, "Oh, that's not coming across at all. This is completely different. I need to change what I'm doing and change my mindset." And in multicam, that's very hard to do. So it was a lot of just going back and checking and saying, does this look right? Does this feel authentic? Because at that point, all I could do was walk into the pilot and say, "All right, well, by the end of the original version of the show, I was essentially just being myself. So all I can do is take my life experiences and the things that really did happen to me and parlay that and how I talk now into what this character is, and hope for the best and hope that people like it, because I guess it's kind of a personal audit on me." If they're not a fan of how Freddie is now, that means that they just don't really like how I've changed as a person over the last decade. So, we're not exactly the same person, but most of what you see as Freddie is a large reflection of how I would talk and how I would react in the faces that I would make. We have a very strong kinship still.
And going even beyond that journey of refiguring out who he was as a character, there was also the journey of everybody collectively figuring out what is the voice of this show going to be now, paying homage to everything that you guys created over several years. But also it's again just so unique because I was trying to think if there were any other shows that have done what you've done, which is take what was a children's show and a young audience piece and then really make it adult and carry it through for that exact same audience several years later.
Yeah.
And it feels like you're the first show that's really navigated this space. And so, was it easy for everybody to find what that voice and what that tone needed to be? Or was there a little bit of a journey of it? Because, you know, when we look at scenes like the girls' trip episode, where one of Carly's friends mistakenly thinks that there's going to be a threesome, obviously that never would have been in the original show, but it
Right.
still fits tonally within all of the rest of the space that you've all created by the time we get to an episode like that.
Yeah. Like anything, it's definitely a journey. I think our journey was at the beginning maybe a little bit more fraught, as you're saying. You know, I was trying to rack my brain too to figure out, has anyone else tried to do this? And I couldn't think of anything. And at the same time that was a little scary because there was no blueprint, there was no roadmap, there was no, okay, this show tried it, they didn't quite do this right, we can try and change that, or we can do something different. We were very much heading into uncharted territory. But I think once everyone kind of got together and sort of formulated slowly this idea of what the show was going to be and what the tone was going to be, that changed pretty quickly to excitement. You know, that it's not so much that we have to be the first people to do this, but that we get to be the first people to do this. And we can kind of become the blueprint if we execute this correctly. And luckily, it was a big question mark while we were making it, but before it aired, you know, it felt good while we were doing it. It felt fun. It felt fresh. It felt exciting. But we didn't know if people were going to resonate with that or not, or if they would cling so much to the exact tone and feel of the old show that it would feel too foreign, or even forced. You know, that we were trying to make a kid's concept adult. And I think luckily we threaded that needle and walked the line, and it ended up being something that people really, to me, kind of surprisingly resonated with. You know, we were obviously hoping for a positive response, but people really love being negative about anything that has to do with their childhood or a revival or bringing back something that they're used to. You know, it's really hard to do those people justice, but I guess that's just a testament to how much time and thought and effort and kind of, you know, creative struggle went into us all trying to get together and say, what are people going to appreciate? There were a lot of different iterations of this show, and it took a lot of conversation to find something that we thought would be the thing that would do the most justice to the fans and to our characters. You know, we all went into this having really specific desires to, you know, do right by these people that we crafted all those years ago too. You know, we didn't want to be flippant to old storylines. We really wanted to not completely just dismiss things that happened, but instead lean into them to tie in the old comfort and nostalgia of the show, but reframe it in a very new way, and to present adult problems and things that people in their 20s and 30s who were kids when they first watched the show would now potentially be experiencing. Granted, in a more zany iCarly way. I don't think there's many people who are going to be invited to their arch nemesis's wedding, you know, in a robot dress that transforms into a wedding dress while people are watching. Like, it's a very only on iCarly is that going to happen. But it's still the idea of, you know, you're going to get invited to the wedding of a person that you don't like, you know, and what are you going to do about that when they're bringing you just to spite you and flaunt how happy they are in your face? That's a thing that people are going to have to deal with at some point or another. So, you know, getting to take adult problems, but frame them in a wacky way and maybe take them a little bit too far, kind of Seinfeld style, you know, has been really, really fun. And the episode that I got to direct had a lot of, you know, crazy bits and special effects, things that you wouldn't necessarily see on an episode of Friends or, a classic network adult grown-up sitcom. We still get to have fun with it, but we get to frame it in these adult storylines. And I think that that's something that people have really taken a shine to. And I hope that that continues and that we keep trying to do them justice as much as possible. The original fans, we're doing it truly for them.
And I'm so glad that you brought up your directing, because I wanted to talk a little bit more about that, because you've also directed a number of other television episodic pieces, from Game Shakers to Henry Danger. But I was fascinated by your journey into episodic directing and really figuring out what your voice was going to be as a director, because television directing is such a fascinating space, because you still have to come in with a clear sense and style, and at the same time, exactly the way that you were describing, you're still working within the parameters that the show has set up and exactly what the voice of that show is going to be and who those characters are. And so did you feel like there was a real evolution and a difference in coming and directing an episode of iCarly versus the previous episodic directing that you had done, given that this is a show that, you for all intents and purposes have literally grown up with yourself, and you probably are one of the few people that knows more details than anybody else in the room about it at this point?
Yeah. There was definitely differences and similarities for sure. Directing on Game Shakers and Henry Danger, which were children's shows, honest to goodness, young person content. There's still certainly a level of wackiness and zaniness in those shows that did still very much carry over. And I think, again, that's why iCarly has resonated so much, but it's definitely different. The level of acting and the level of intricacy that you can find doing an adult show, working with adults, and especially these adults who I have literally grown up, and basically everything that I know about acting, I learned alongside them. And so coming into it, rather than being kind of in a teacher mentality for these young kids, at least in the early seasons. I mean, by the time Henry Danger was done, these kids were adults, and they had done at that point more episodes of their show than I had done of iCarly. So like they knew exactly what they were doing, by the end. It was a different thing. But, during the first seasons of both of those shows, I came in as a person that they knew from the original iCarly, and they knew that I had been in their shoes, literally exactly where they were standing with the same crew, and so for them, I think that I was a voice that they could trust. And that if I told them, hey, try this, or turn just little stuff, turn on this line, but make sure that you turn going this direction, little stuff like that. I think that they knew that they could trust me. And that I had been probably told that before by another very experienced director when I was their age. That was a whole different thing compared to walking up to my peers. And especially for Miranda in the episode that I directed, she had a lot of very emotional pieces. And that was what was so exciting to me. Was in multicam, there's not a ton of opportunities to dig into emotional, nostalgic pieces. And so the fact that I got the chance to do that episode and really dig into something that goes into the backstory, and, there's a good mix of heart and comedy and really good moments, especially for her, getting to just sit and talk with her about little nuances and mentalities and little tweaks, and really bump up that drama and the choices that she was making, and affirm what she was doing, kind of going out on a limb and doing something in multicam that she didn't really get to do before, or if she did, it was in very rare circumstances. It was an honor for me to be able to, focus on my acting hat in that, and come into it as a peer, especially because with multicam as a medium, it's a little bit more formulaic. As a director, there's kind of more of a checklist of coverage to get. You need to get these shots, and once you get these shots, technically you're done. The fun part, in addition to getting to have a little bit more of an actor focus, is to find little ways where, yeah, you can do that checklist, but there's little things that you can do to open up and add a little bit of flavor, put your own interpretation on it. Like there's a very specific shot in the episode where Carly's talking to another lady in this mechanic class, where she's complaining about this mechanic that has been dealing with her. And during her line, it opens up wide to see him walking into the background, and we reveal that the person that she's talking about is teaching this class. In traditional multi-camera coverage, you might just kind of cut to a wide shot where he's just sort of standing there. And for our camera coordinator, our associate director, whose job it is to kind of fashion the shots with me, that was sort of his assumption, what he wanted to do, because that would be the more traditional route. But I told him, I feel like it would sort of bump up a little bit of just put a little spice on it, a little flavor on it, if we could, on her line, open up wide to reveal him while she's talking, rather than just do a traditional cut. And at first he was like, I don't know. That might be telegraphing. And I was like, let's just try it one time. And if it telegraphs, fine. But then we did it and it worked. And it was a really cool moment to just feel like that was my kind of theatrical side coming out, and getting to do things that, rather than just put a play on camera, which is sort of the initial idea of a multicam sitcom. You're three walls in front of an audience, but the audience is a camera. So just get your coverage and call it a day. Getting to do little things like that to bring you into it a little bit more and add your own kind of interpretations of things was super fun. Not only that, but I also got to do the kind of slow-mo, single camera, really cool golden hour shot through the smoke of introducing that Wes character, which you don't really get to do on multicam either. But as soon as I read the script, I had this immediate vision in my head of exactly what I wanted that to look like. And all it said was, it's in slow-mo, and he walks toward Carly kind of Magic Mike style. He looks all sexy, and he wipes his brow and, wipes some oil off of his arm. But to me, I looked at that and I said, okay, smoke for sure, golden light for sure, and single camera, like POV, really, and bounce back and forth of slow-mo between Carly and Wes, which that wasn't in the script either. But as soon as I read it, I was like, okay, I think this is it. I think this is the bit where we're actually seeing both of them. And it's in this really specific lighting style. So I got to work with the director of photography, which you also don't really get to do on a multi-camera sitcom. They kind of just are in their booth and they are checking to make sure everything looks good, but you don't really get to say, I'd really like to do something special with this. So we got to figure out, where's the light coming from? What's the color? What time of day is it? All this little fun stuff that's more reserved for single camera, I got to do on multi-camera. So it kind of inspired me, I think, to branch out and really want to do some of the single camera stuff, because I got to do a little more artistic interpretation than you normally get to do, which was really exciting as well. So there was a lot of really fun stuff that I was honored to have the chance to dig into on this episode. And I hope that I can kind of carry that on in other projects. Like I'd still love to be able to do network sitcoms with the big titans of the industry. It's not on anymore, but like I shadowed on Last Man Standing and Big Bang Theory, these big shows with these pillars of multi-camera comedy. I know I'm young, but I'm at least in the mindset that they have. And I think that it would be really fun to work with them as peers and try to elevate, that content as much as I can within the medium. So that's definitely a goal that I have moving forward, regardless with what happens with me on the acting side, for sure.
But even as well as your directing experience, you also have such a wealth of experience with having that particular eye and understanding of everything from all of your years of acting. And I thought it was so interesting that when you described working on the show originally, that you always looked at the directors and would just see them sweating and just see the stress and how difficult it was. But even with seeing all of that, did you find that you were either consciously or subconsciously still just looking at a lot of the specific choices that they were making, why they were making, how they were telling a story, so that when you did first step behind the camera, that you all of a sudden realized that there were all these details that you'd been picking up in different ways from just paying attention to those sorts of details on set for years?
Yeah, I think that was actually kind of one of the things that presented the opportunity of directing to me. When that opportunity first came, the sort of inspiration for that was being told, hey, you're paying attention on set and you are already in the director mindset where we're seeing you helping the directors. And if they're stuck on the blocking for the actors, you're presenting solutions to them that they are then using and putting in the show. And this was when I was 19 years old, so basically the gist of that conversation was, you're already kind of doing it. We can see that you're learning. So if you'd like to move on to directing, especially with a crew that you've worked with before, you're welcome here. And that was how Henry Danger and Game Shakers came about. So that was already kind of something that I guess I didn't even realize that I was doing. I kind of just thought that that was just part of acting, was just sort of contributing and making a scene work and learning the flow. But I guess I didn't realize in all that time, I kind of was shadowing, whether or not I realized it. But the big difference, though, is I was never really able to spend much time in Video Village, where the director actually was, where the conversations were happening, or where they were talking to the associate director or the camera coordinator or the DP. And so what really changed that was, before I did my first episode of directing on Henry Danger in 2014, I shadowed on that set for a month. And it luckily, each week had a different director in those 4 weeks leading up to it. So I got to see directors that I had been working with since I was a child. It was all directors that I had known for years and years, but I got to watch them come in early, leave late, and lay out every bit of the episode and tackle problems and handle issues with different departments having conflicting needs and finding solutions for them and watching how they do it. And I think in a way, it's very eye-opening, because like I said, in the beginning, when I was just watching the show, I would just see them sweating and thinking, oh, that looks so stressful. I would never want to do that. And yes, I can still say directing is the most stressful thing I've ever done. You have to wear so many hats and be conscious of so many things. And then when you're acting in the same episode, you have to be conscious of your own acting, and you don't even have the backstop of a director to redirect you, to say, maybe think about doing this instead, as they're watching. I mean, fortunately, we have our writers and our showrunners, so they were my backstop, but I had one less layer of help. So there's so many things that you have to keep in mind. But shadowing, I think, was the number one thing that, it was film school for me, getting to watch them and really step into their shoes, but also challenge myself to kind of audit my own feelings about how something should be. When I would get the script, I would do the blocking for it. And then I would compare how they did it. And then I would do the shot list and then compare how it was actually done. So I had the opportunity to kind of see, against pros who had been doing this for decades, where I stacked up. And I learned a ton from those people. And fortunately, the crew that I was working with was incredibly gracious. And I could have absolutely failed if it wasn't for the fact that they were so kind and accommodating, and they knew that I was deferring to them because they had so much more knowledge than me. And for that reason, I think they wanted to share that knowledge, and going into it knowing there's so much that I have to learn from these people, I think was a really important way to go about it, because there are so many people involved in making a good TV show. And I think that really quickly gets left behind and forgotten about. But those credits that you watch at the end of the episode, those are the people who make this a reality. The actors put it on, the writers put it on paper, the directors make sure it looks good and is cohesive, but doggone, there's a lot of moving pieces that you really have to make sure are all in play, and that everybody is doing their absolute best, and that everybody is happy and satisfied with the work that they're doing. And that, I think, is one of the most important things that I learned as a director. There's so much more to it than just what's on camera. It's what goes into it that makes it feel alive. And that's one of the things that I love so much about really putting my focus on behind the scenes.
Absolutely. And because you were mentioning before about some of the scenes that you were working on with Miranda for Carly that were a little bit more emotional, and how sometimes within the format, it doesn't always allow for that as much, I wanted to talk a little bit about how you broach that performance wise, because when we look at Freddy, there are a lot of moments, talking to his 2 divorces, the fact that his business has failed. He's not necessarily in the place that he wants to be in life. He's living with his parents. And, if we look at an episode like the one where he's questioning if he wasted his entire 20s on things that didn't work out and didn't pan out exactly how he hoped, there's obviously really comedic elements to that, but there's also a lot of vulnerability that we get to see in him. And we really get to see a lot of emotional heart through him as a character in moments like that. And so when you have episodes or scenes that do that dance, how do you tend to broach that duality of still kind of always leaning into the comedic voice of the show and everything that it is in its essence, but still finding how much of that emotional vulnerability that you want to bring into your performance?
I think really the key is it's, I guess it sounds kind of flippant or passe, but just authenticity rather than trying to force it to go one way or another. You know, you're not forcing a single tear down your cheek, but you're also not trying to present this vulnerable moment as a joke, you know. And the upside is it's still a comedy. It's still written funny. There are jokes within serious dialogue, but that's real. You know, when my wife and I have a very serious discussion, it is not uncommon for us to crack up laughing at something that someone says in the middle of that discussion, because brevity is important. Brevity gets us through a lot of those vulnerable moments. But I think the core thing is to not lose sight of the fact that even though we're doing 22 minutes of comedy, if we're going to be authentic about the fact that these are people in their late 20s and early 30s and life is happening to these people, it's okay to be open about the fact that not everything is going to be funny. There was even in the pilot, there was a scene that got heavily rewritten and adjusted because the note was, this isn't funny enough. We want it, we'd rather it be funny and played for laughs. And Miranda and I had to go back and say, it's okay that it's not funny. Like it's okay to have a really heartfelt moment where we talk about stuff that matters, even if it's the pilot. It doesn't have to be wall to wall jokes. These people are invested in us as characters. And that's the upside too. With this pilot, we weren't introducing a brand new cast of characters for the first time where we had to convince people that everybody was funny with ha 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 the whole time. We got to really look back on stuff and have aw moments and aw moments. There was opportunities to slow down for a minute and lean into the fact that not everything on the show is perfect. Not everybody's life is the way that we wanted it to be. And so getting to be real about that and not force everything to be 100% funny all the time, and have moments where we can really say, it's okay to just talk about stuff. Yeah, we'll make you laugh, but it's also comforting to know that these people that you grew up with since you were 9 years old are dealing with stuff that you're kind of dealing with too. And yeah, it's in a wacky, zany way, but I don't think that that's bad to do. And I feel like that's another kind of thing that I sort of want to lean into. And I hope that other people lean into, especially if, older properties get retooled for adult use. I know there's the whole thing with like Lizzie McGuire that was going to be a thing, and like now it's not. And people were always said like, man, if Lizzie McGuire could have done what iCarly did, it would have been so interesting, So maybe this is going to be sort of a resurgence of people realizing that you can do this, if you do it the right way, and if you really honor what the fans want, but also grow with them. They're willing to hear and slow down for a second and maybe have a moment to commiserate with us about adult stuff that's maybe not so funny. Like when my ex-wife shows up in the show, we get to have a real kind of heartfelt moment about divorce and how it sucks, but how family is family. That wasn't ha 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 ha, but it was still good to say that. And we got feedback from people saying like, as a child of divorce, I loved seeing that. That was emotional for me, but emotional in a good way and cathartic for me. We get to do really cool stuff like that in this new environment. And I'm glad that they're allowing us to have moments of slowing down and leaning into serious adult stuff in that way.
I really hope that, as you said, that it does open up the door for the opportunity for other shows to really look at what you're doing. And going back to one of the very first things that you said earlier about this really being a possible blueprint of how you can navigate this, and everything that you just said about the authenticity and the heart, I think is exactly why this resurgence has worked so well and really resonated with audiences. So thank you so much for sharing all of this. Really appreciate it, Nathan.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.